Yeah, security is not really a sexy topic, so don't expect this to be about brand new features of 7.1 primarily. This is more like a reminder for many, and also some new features that we may not have heard about. So, to get started, it's quite difficult to talk about application security without mentioning OWASP and the top 10 vulnerability report that they publish periodically. So there was one in 2013 and a revised one in 2017. And things have shifted around a little bit, and a couple of new vulnerabilities have come in the 2017 report. So what I thought I'd do to make this presentation relevant to your projects, because this is really more about dev lifecycle sort of security stuff in your projects, I'm going to frame the talk around the top 10 2017 vulnerabilities. So number 1, injection. And it's quite amazing that this vulnerability is the same in 2013 and 17. It's both times number 1, despite all the frameworks that are out there protecting against this. And for those who are not very familiar with it, essentially it takes many forms. It could take this form, where your code is using the runtime class to execute a command on the operating system. So here you're expecting to call an antivirus checker to scan a file that's given by name as user input or by request. But you've got a malicious user on your hands here, so he thinks, okay, I'm going to tweak this file name parameter. I'm going to put this red string in, which actually causes a second command to execute that deletes all your files on the server. And that kind of makes your day, you know? You can see the final command that's being executed here. So the solution here is to validate and sanitize the user input. Make sure it is a file name. It doesn't contain a semicolon, other stuff that could cause multiple commands to be executed. But really, it's SQL injection that we hear about in web applications the most, I would say. And the only difference between this and the last one is, in this context, it's the SQL driver that is interpreting the final string. And here's an example of a potential attack where they send 1 or 1 equals 1, which is like always true. So in this case, it deletes all your invoices. Not great. And the solution here is to use JDBC or similar to bind the user input to placeholders in your SQL query. So the driver will take care of that. So in Liferay, the solution is really Service Builder, which you may have heard of, because this will do that binding for you using Hibernate under the hood. So you don't really need to worry about this. It's even taken care of in custom SQL queries and dynamic queries as well. So moving on, broken authentication. So what's this? Well, it's insufficient controls to prevent a malicious user from impersonating another user. And it normally comes about from a broken session handling or poor user credentials policy. So in Liferay, we take security very seriously. Session handling and authentication, we believe, is very strong in Liferay. And we're doing things like this. Session invalidation and rotation upon logging in and logging out. We have password policies, which you can define arbitrary policies that meet your requirements, or you can delegate to the LDAP policy of your organization. And we hash passwords and salt them to prevent brute force login attempts. But if Liferay is not meeting your requirements, we also support single sign-on with other protocols that are very standards orientated, OpenID Connect, SAML2, and solutions like OpenAM. So number 3, sensitive data exposure. And this is really the big one at the moment, the stuff you hear about in the news, because it's usually quite shocking. It's when large data sets get compromised. So data sets of payment card information or personal information downloaded from the solution, from your system, to the hackers' systems, and then offline they can do what they want with that. So you have to design your solution as if at some point this will happen to you. Yeah, you need sensitive stuff needs to be either hashed, so you don't store the original, or strongly encrypted. So in the case of Liferay Vanilla, at least the user passwords are not stored in plain text. They're hashed, and we use very strong hashing algorithms recommended by OWASP. We apply it like 128,000 times. Yeah, so the values reapplied many times. But as of 7.1, you have a extension point, or series of extension points, well, otherwise called SPI. I'm not sure if that term's been thrown around a lot this time. And this basically enables your project to participate in the GDPR features that we've added to Liferay. In fact, this will be 7.0 as well. I should make that clear. And because we have a UI where the admin can delete or anonymize any data associated with users. Yeah? So if they choose to be forgotten from your system, yeah, these extension points will be used to then render assets from your project, or anonymize your project's assets, or export them. So number 4, XML External Entities. Now, I don't really like the name of this vulnerability because it's actually a feature. Yeah, in XML, you do want external entities, yeah, and you want entities. So what is this? So entities, basic entities, is really about substitution. Like in XML, you can't use the less than character in a text node because that denotes the start of a new node. So use &LT semicolon, that's an entity. But you can also have these external entities where it brings in content from the file system or an HTTP or URI endpoint. And that's what the vulnerability in this case, shown here, exploits. Yeah? The hacker will be sending an XML document, like through some kind of file upload feature of your app. It contains this, which then, so an XXE entity, which is then expanded into the contents of the parsed WD file, a very sensitive file. And if your app then echoes back the result of parsing this, they'll see the contents of that file. They'll learn about your infrastructure, which is not a great start. But it also takes other forms, like this billion laughs exploit, where a very simple entity is based on many occurrences of another entity, and then this repeats upwards. It's called a amplification attack because you're sending a very small string to the server, but this expands into like megabytes of data held in memory by the parser. So that's a denial service, really. Your parser is all overwhelmed, your application might crash, etc. Now, in Liferay, we provide a util called Secure XML Factory Provider Util. And on it, you have methods that provide entry points to get all the different kinds of parsers that you need in your projects. Yeah, so these are industry standard approaches to XML parsing. You have DOM, SACs, and stacks. So I urge you to have a look at this. And the way it fixes the problem is by disabling DTD processing and entity expansion. So entities are defined in DTDs, the kind of start bit of the XML. And that's disabled. You probably don't need entities in your project. Yeah. Oh, and I should also say in Java, it's particularly exploitable because majority of parsers have DTD and entity expansion enabled by default. So they're not secure by default. Okay, number 5, broken access control. So this can take many forms, really. You have insufficient user permission checking, or you can be bypassing it by manipulating the requests to the system. You can have privilege elevation, which means assigning yourself more permission than what you have been given. But it can also be unauthorized access to the API by some client. Yeah, so not user-centric. So in Liferay, we provide permission checker to check the appropriate permissions. We don't rely on the URLs or anything. Anything should be checked against permissions before doing anything with it. And you can get the permission checker from your remote service or the theme display as well for UI stuff. Now, often when you're dealing with security, there is a performance hit because you're doing more checks. So we provide some optimizations that are available to your services when you're dealing with collections of model instances, like all users or all blogs, whatever. And this would delegate the permission checking to the database tier. Yeah, it's much faster. But I wanted to mention here that any front-end code needs to go via the remote services layer. You should never call local services. I've seen many examples, especially like MVC commands in Liferay context, going straight to the local services. It's easily done. Yeah, just make sure you go through remote. That's where permissions are. But if you want to talk about JSON API and unauthorized access to API, then in Liferay we have a cross-site request forgery token that prevents arbitrary clients out there from calling the API. You need to have a relationship with Liferay first. So that's enabled by default. Also, you can limit the API surface that you're exposing remotely by using service access policies. And essentially, you list the method signatures that you, like remote service signatures, that you want to expose. Yeah. But as of 7.1, we also have OAuth 2. So if you're thinking about authorizing a third-party client, app, website, whatever, you should consider this. And this works with JSON. There's a question about this yesterday, I think, because it dynamically assigns service access policies to the request based on the authorization of the OAuth 2 client. Yeah, so by default, you can have no policy, and then you can register specific clients out there and the policies that make sense to those. So number 6, security misconfiguration. And I don't want to say a lot about this because it's usually more to do with infrastructure. But I did want to say that as a company, Liferay does follow a secure by default approach to development, which means if you install Liferay out of the box, it will have a pretty good level of security, like a sensible level of security. Which means, when you're using Liferay for maybe 20% of its functionality, you don't need to be concerned about the 80% you don't really understand, But you do need to disable the default admin user, which, default password is out there, it's public, and you should use HTTPS. So number 7, cross-site scripting. Again, an age-old problem. It doesn't go away. It's still in top 10. And for those who are not familiar, it's very similar to injection. The only difference is, in this context, it's not the SQL parser that's being attacked or the operating system. It's actually the browser. Yeah. So what the attacker is trying to do is get the browser to execute things the designer of that web app did not design it to do. So in this case, you have a typical example of maybe a form where you enter some values, you post it to the server, and then there are some validation errors, so you want to re-render that form, and you're re-rendering with the values provided to the server. So it's coming from the user, essentially. But they bypass that, and they just send this malicious string. And the resulting code, it's leaving the context of the attribute, the value attribute, leaving the tag. It's now starting a new script tag and then executing arbitrary JavaScript, which, you can take cookies, you can call endpoints, whatever. So you need to escape it appropriately. And you need to know the context, which is attribute in this case. The quotation marks get escaped with these hash x22 sequences. That ensures that the whole string is contained within the attribute. So in Liferay, we have HTML util to help you protect against this. And it's got various methods that represent the different contexts. And just to really drill in this point about context, you see the quotation mark there for JavaScript, href, and attributes. It's escaped very, very differently. Yeah, so don't end up like this guy thinking, this is fine, I've escaped, but everything's on fire around you. You're not noticing it. But we can actually go a bit further than this. There's a convenience in Liferay when you're using Service Builder and you're using the Liferay UI search container tag. Because any model generated by Service Builder will annotate the model's interface with auto escape for string fields. The strings are what are the vehicle of cross-site scripting. So in order to apply that auto-escaping within your JSP, you need to use these search container tags and send it, or use the attribute on it, escaped model equals true. Then all the auto-escaping will take place when you call get methods on that model instance. So number 8, insecure deserialization. This is a new one for 2017, and it's gaining momentum all the time. It's becoming more frequent. So what is it? Deserialization is the opposite to serialization, where you take the object state and you serialize it to a byte stream so that it can be communicated to another process or even across the network. So we use it for like staging, for example, in Liferay. And the vulnerability is when you deserialize this. Because if you deserialize to a type which expects its internal state to have been pre-validated, like gone through layers of validation, sanitization, and ahead of being assigned, then this can bypass those layers. So the malicious user can actually inject pre-authenticated, like in quotation marks, state into that object. Then if your receiving code assumes it's validated, authenticated, and operates on it, that could lead to remote code execution, which is the death of all vulnerabilities. So in Liferay, we provide JSON factory util because we serialize and deserialize to JSON format. And it avoids deserialization to types that we do not expect to receive. Yeah, so it's a whitelisting approach, which is the best approach really for this. And these are the two methods you can use. Loose deserialize, they're called. But how do you define what is expected for your project? Yeah, we can't tell you that ahead of time. So because Liferay's OSGI, what you do is you register a service. You can do that using declarative services like @component. And the key thing here is to register that service with a specific property, which is shown in bold, whose value is your particular Java type. Yeah. Then it gets added to the whitelist. Okay, so moving on. Using components with known vulnerabilities. I'm quite pleased that fit on the width of the display here. That's good. Good start. So, using components with known vulnerabilities. Well, all software has bugs and vulnerabilities. Liferay has. Other software will do too. And we fix those bugs, but occasionally there are regressions. It's inevitable. Yeah, so different versions will have different vulnerabilities, any software. But in the case of most commonly in Java, you're dealing with libraries, code libraries. And you should only be concerned about vulnerabilities in those libraries if they are exploitable via your code. Yeah, unless you're directly exposing them out, which you probably aren't. So it's all that software configuration. So how do you determine this? Well, a good start is to get your list of libraries that you depend on, and then go to the CVE website, which lists all well-known libraries and vulnerabilities against different versions. But then you need to also understand how you're using the libraries. You need to look at your code and get a real handle on this. So if you do determine that you are making a vulnerability exploitable through your code, then you need to upgrade that library if possible. If that's not possible, you can leverage OSGI sometimes, especially if you're using different functionality from the same library in different contexts. So you can actually have the same library in different versions in different OSGI modules and kind of make them all coexist. Okay, so number 10, insufficient logging and monitoring. I'm not going to say a lot about this, really, but you need to log in your applications. It's good advice generally, not just security. Because if you don't log usefully, then what are you going to do when there's a breach and you want to determine what's the extent of that breach? You need to inform your customers sensibly that what has been exposed. So please do log in your Liferay Portal solution. So that's the top 10 2017 vulnerabilities. Now we've got a bit more time, so I'm going to go back to 2013 and just talk about a couple that didn't quite make this list. They're still very prominent out there, and Liferay can help with them, so it's worth mentioning. The first one is cross-site request forgery. And it's best explained, for those who are not aware, using the banking example. Yeah, banking is a very sensitive application, and you want to be in control of money transfers as a bank account holder. But if that bank is vulnerable to this vulnerability, then they might enable an attacker to get you as a victim to visit a certain website that makes a request on their behalf without them knowing to, say, transfer some money into their account, yeah, which is not very nice. So countermeasures for this is to use tokens, cross-site request forgery tokens, and it's a very simple protection. The token is stored in the user session, and it's matched against a equivalent token that's provided as part of the request. So any state-changing request should have this token along with it. And if it doesn't match, excuse me, if it doesn't match, then you just reject processing that action. Now, one thing that's really important, which I'd maybe a bit value add to this, is be very careful not to put the token in the request URL or query string, because by doing so, you could leak it to arbitrary solutions, websites, through the refer header. Yeah, so make sure it's in the request body. So in Liferay, we provide a utility, auth token util, to get the current session token and also check it. But also, when you create portlet action URLs, we automatically add the token to that URL. So I'm just going against what I just said. It's added to the URL. Not good practice. However, if you then use the AUI form tag with method post and use that generated URL on it, then AUI will move that token from the request parameter to the request body. Yeah, so you don't have that vulnerability in your code. And for any other type of action like struts or arbitrary actions, anything that changes state, you do need to use the auth token util directly to get the current token before you send in the request, and then validate it when you receive it. Another vulnerability that didn't make the year 2017 was unvalidated redirects and forwards. And this is when your website or solution blindly trusts user input, like blindly trusts receiving URLs to redirect the user to, no validation. And that enables then hackers to socially engineer your user base because they trust your solution. They trust you not to have this vulnerability. And they may not realize they've been redirected. So it leads to phishing, phishing credentials, phishing other stuff. So the solution is to whitelist the URLs that you allow redirects to. So we have a utility for that. It's in the portal util, actually. Escape redirect method. But its processing is based on how you configure portal properties. So you can either whitelist by domains, or you can do it by IP addresses. Additionally, we have protection at HTTP headers. I just want to list these really. They're all out of the box protected. So clickjacking, for example. You can't frame Liferay within another website and then provide like a layer on top where you're intercepting the clicks and sort of pretending that they clicked on that thing they thought they did, but in fact, they're doing something different. And there's a cross-site scripting vulnerability to do with binaries. There's cookies being read by JavaScript and not securing the cookies. So we're setting appropriate headers for all these. And with that, I'm going to conclude the talk and open up the floor to questions. So just leave somebody slide up.
Questions? Are you sure? Good.
Thanks. So does Liferay plan to implement some better way how to create an initial admin user without making it open? Right now, if you start up, it will wait, right? And it was mentioned.
Instead of the test at liferay.com, essentially.
Yeah, so like Jenkins does it, like some secret, you have to read the logs to get it or something.
I'm not aware of any plans like that. Not really, no. Do you want to move the mic up and say?
Yeah, it's already there. You can set you can set a password, I think, in the portal properties before you start it.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that myself. So that's
At
nice
least
tip.
you can change the default portal admin test user.
Yeah, I guess when you install vanilla Liferay, you have the setup wizard property, so you can actually set those, and it will create the test at Liferay user based on that. So yeah, that's available.